What's the quickest and most effective way to learn something new? Whether it's learning about nutrition, about how to learn a new language, or how to change a tire, there are certain methodologies that work way better than others, and most of us are going about it all wrong. If you're listening on the Apple Podcasts app or on Spotify, make sure you hit the follow button. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit subscribe down below so you don't miss any of the newest episodes to get you looking and feeling your best. Today we get to hear from Scott Young, and Scott is the author of the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, Ultralearning, and the new book, Get Better at Anything, where he explores research and evidence for how to gain mastery in any skill that you desire. Since 2006, Scott has published weekly essays to help people learn and think better. His work has been featured in the New York Times, Business Insider, and at TEDx. In today's episode in particular, you guys are going to learn, number one, why it's important to not actually ask experts for advice. Number two, you'll learn about how you can get better at learning how to eat healthy. You'll learn why learning from failure is not actually the best way to learn. And lastly, my favorite part is you'll learn the 3 questions that we should ask ourselves when beginning to learn anything new. For now, it's time to get closer to your best you with Scott Young. All right, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Best You podcast. Today, we have a special treat. We're joined by the one and only Scott Young to learn how to get better at anything. Scott, I admittedly have not finished your book in its entirety yet, and honestly, it's mainly because I'm a pretty fast reader, but I've been taking so many notes on this book that it's taken me more time to get through than normal. But Get Better at Anything, 12 Maxims for Mastery. I really wish I was able to know a lot of this knowledge back when I was like in high school and in college so that I could utilize some of that advice to get better at school, but it's not too late. There's still ways to apply this today. So I'm going to start off just kind of with the overarching framework of like the best way to learn something or get better at something is to see and then do and then get feedback. And so I'm going to kind of start off with under the C side of things. And I really think it's imperative and that we all know it's important to learn from people who are above us, have mentors, learn from experts. But one of the things that I think is really good that you talk about is when you're learning from experts, don't necessarily ask for advice, but ask for stories. Talk to us about why that distinction is important.
Yeah, sure. So one of the features of expertise that's well studied is that as you gain proficiency in a skill, parts of the skill become automated, which means that they kind of get processed by your brain in an unconscious way. The easiest way to think about this is with physical skills, obviously. You know, I was, this was several years ago. I was with a friend and I was trying to teach him how to swim and tread water. And like I have been, swimming since I was a kid. I've done it a lot of times. And I was having a really hard time explaining why the motion I make with my hands, sometimes you go forward and sometimes you go backward. Like, what is the difference? Because I'm sort of doing the same thing, but I guess I'm pushing more in one way and then the other, and that's changing the direction. And so this is an example where like, I can perform the skill, but I have a really hard time articulating how I perform the skill. And this is fairly general. There's obviously, if you understand something that's more conceptual, like physics, a physicist doesn't just do it on instinct. They understand a lot of concepts, so they can teach things. But even then, the physicist who's writing down the equation, they'll skip over 3 or 4 steps that they think are obvious. Like, well, okay, well, this, then obviously this. And because the person who is still learning, do not know those 3 or 4 steps, or they're not obvious to you, you suddenly lost the plot and you're lost in class. And so one of the things that is a real challenge in learning from other people is how do you get them to break it down, make it so that you can understand the things that either are unconscious to them or are just so obvious that they don't think are worth mentioning. And so stories is one way of doing this, because if you just ask someone for general advice, or you just ask them, oh, tell me this, they're going to maybe focus on the high level ideas. But if you ask them to walk through what they actually did in a particular situation, they're going to surface a lot of details that are actually going to be important to you, but you might otherwise miss. I mean, one of the ways that this really has impacted my work and working with students is when you're getting career advice. So one of the things, I have a course that I co-instruct with Cal Newport. And one of the things that we get students to do who are trying to work on breaking into a career or making a move in their career is to find people 2 to 3 steps ahead of them and ask them for how their career works. Like, how does it work? Like, how did you get to that point? So you can sort of reverse engineer it and apply it to yourself. So if you're trying to get a position in a company, you can figure out, well, who are they hiring? What kinds of skills do I need to have? What do I need to upgrade in my resume or practice in the interviewing technique? And one of the things we found when we first set people loose to try this out is they would just ask these people for advice. And then they would get these stories about like, oh, it's all about hard work and grit and this kind of stuff. And the person's like, no, 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 no. Like, I want to know like exactly like what do you put on your resume so that you can get hired at this company? And so what we found was that if you switch to a more journalistic style of talking to people, you just say, okay, so what did you do then? And then what was your next step after that? You switch their frame of thinking and they focus on a lot of details that would otherwise be passed over. So this is a very important technique, I think, for eliciting knowledge, eliciting the skills and wisdom that other people have.
Yeah, I think it's huge, and there is such a distinction because I know ever since I began podcasting, I feel like I luckily somewhat naturally was more doing it from like a journalistic standpoint of, because like I'm not asking the person one-on-one for advice. And so like when I was reading that, I was like, oh yeah, I need to make sure that when I'm asking you questions and when I'm asking other interviewees questions, that it's not necessarily like advice for people, but it's like, give me your story, like give me what you did, because if, especially like from a career trajectory standpoint, when you hear the steps that people took and the things that people did, that in and of itself is advice. But it's like practical advice that you can then take, not just kind of like other kinds of advice. And kind of along those same lines, I think sometimes when you ask people advice, people say things that sound good, but they didn't necessarily apply themselves. And I think one of the biggest cliches that people use nowadays is you learn most from your failures than anything else. And I want you to talk about how necessarily learning from your failure isn't maybe the best way to go about it, especially initially.
Well, so it's definitely the case that, especially when we're starting on anything new, failure is inevitable. And so it's good to have a good attitude toward failure. Like if you have stumbles, you want to pick yourself up again. If you experience something negative, you want to keep pushing through it. Those are all good qualities. So I don't deny that. But there is sometimes a kind of an exaggeration of this effect that, well, the key to becoming really good is to just sort of load up the challenge, like make it as hard as possible in the beginning. And that's how like true champions are born. So you can think of this in the context of like a fitness routine is just like, well, it's all about like just completely shredding yourself on that very first workout. Or you can think about this in the context of, learning a new skill, just like making it as hard as possible. And this is not what the research shows on motivation. So one of the key concepts that is behind motivation is this idea of self-efficacy, which is that our motivation to do things is related not only to how much we value the outcome that we want, whether that's, being in really good shape or learning Spanish or what have you, but also our belief in our ability to do the things that are necessary to achieve the goal. And the issue is that for a lot of new skills, a lot of new domains, especially if we've had difficulties in the past, our self-efficacy is fairly low. We have never had any experience doing this before. So we don't have any real strong reason to believe that we'd be successful with it. And so if you experience early failures, many consecutive early failures in those attempts, the very natural result is just to give up, just to be like, you know what, it's not working for me. I'm not going to be able to do it. So when we are starting out in a new domain, it's very important to build the motivation slowly, build up those small wins, build up the things that will build that self-efficacy. Now, once your self-efficacy is high and you are like in your comfort zone, then you need to challenge yourself. Then you need to have that adversity to really persist, because if you have high self-efficacy and you persist through a really hard challenge and then you're successful in the end, that's an even better signal to yourself than if you only succeed when things are easy. But if you only fail when things are hard or easy, then that's probably a hard place to get started with motivation.
Yeah, no, I loved this part of the book where it's like you need to build up your self-efficacy first. You have to build small wins. And once you have that foundation of like past successes, then you can learn to persist through some failures and through some setbacks and through some challenges more adeptly than if you just fail right away and fall on your face right away. And kind of along the same lines, a lot of people with a health and fitness journey is maybe the first time they attempt to lose weight, they're not successful. Then they try 2, 3, 4 more times, they're not successful. And then they feel like I can never be successful. And that's kind of like what we're talking about, right? It's like you have to stack up small wins. I think one of the things though that can hold people back from the small wins thing is they sometimes don't value the small wins as much as they should, because they think like only losing half a pound, that's not enough for me. Like I don't value that small win. How would you talk to somebody about how to value the small wins? Be like, no, this actually is meaningful way to get going.
Yeah, so I think my approach to dealing with this problem is just that you always want to break down your big goals into smaller things. So, maybe your big long-term goal is, yeah, you want to lose 50 pounds, right? That's like the big dream. Like that would put you in a healthy weight range, or that's, what you would like to look like. But that's a big goal, and it's certainly going to take a long time to achieve. And again, as you said, if you have this self-efficacy problem, then, you experience a little bit of setback, you hit a plateau, you're not losing any weight anymore. You're just like, it's sticking to this diet is way too hard. I'm going to just give up and go back to the way things work, because at least that was easy. This is a sort of thought process that we all engage in. And so I think the problem is that the goal is too big. You're tackling something that when you think about it, you're like, I don't know whether I can actually achieve that. I don't know whether I can stick to that in the long haul. Whereas if you were focusing on something like, can I exercise every day this week? That's a much smaller goal, right? Or, okay, I'm going to like stick within my whatever diet parameters for 1 week and just see how it goes. Like these little goals, that's a win right there. Another thing you can do is you can focus on the inputs rather than the outputs. So, I mean, one of the things that's very true in life is that we have control over our actions, but we don't have 100% control over the results that we get. And it's true, you want to calibrate your actions to the results you want to get. So if you keep doing the things that don't work, you need to adjust them to get the results. But this sort of somewhat sloppy linkage between trying something and whether or not it succeeds can often be very frustrating. So, in the context of like, say, starting a business, you maybe have to do many different products, many different projects, many different little efforts before you finally find something that works. And it's not that all those things that you did before were just like you weren't trying hard enough. It's just, sometimes you didn't find the right thing. And so I think in these cases, the more there is a sort of action results slippage where there's, potential for the environment or these kind of things to just mean that you did your best, you did what you're supposed to do, but you still didn't get the result. It's helpful to shift that into focusing on the action. So, going to the context of learning, the sort of the topic of this book, did you actually show up and do the sort of studying sessions you're going to do? Did you do the practice that you were going to do? Because if you do that and the skill growth isn't going as good as you'd like, you can make adjustments. But if you don't do that, then that's a lot harder. So I think focusing on action is another way you can shift success in your favor.
Are you somebody who used to be confident in your health, but you've fallen out of a good routine and you're looking to regain the confidence in your body and your health that you once had? What's up, you guys? I'm Nick Carrier, and I'm a body optimization coach and creator of the 10-week transformation that has transformed the bodies and the lives of over 700 people thus far. And I want to tell you about the 10-week transformation challenge. This is a challenge that will completely reset the way that you feel. It's going to completely change the way that you see yourself in the mirror and transform the way that you look at yourself in the mirror. We have a proven framework called the 5 steps to goal success that's going to allow you to set a very specific target, a very specific goal to be at by the end of the 10 weeks. Then we're going to set weekly goals. Then we're going to have the most badass workouts that there are. And you're going to completely transform the way you look and feel in just 10 short weeks. This isn't just trying to look different or trying to feel different or trying to eat healthier or trying to exercise more. This is a plan to do it at a super high level. And I'm the best fitness coach here in Nashville, Tennessee. And if you're in Nashville, you can join today at nickcarrier.com/10WT. If you're not in Nashville, we have a virtual version of the program as well that you can also find at nickcarrier.com/10WT. So click on that link below and you guys, you will not regret it. There's over 700 people that have done it thus far. There have been people who have done it 10, 11, 12, 13 times because they've seen such great results and just can't stop. So go nickcarrier.com/10WT to get started today. Yeah, no doubt about it. I think that when we can shift our definition of the result as the execution of the process rather than the result itself, that's when we can reliably be more consistent. I think one of the things that I love that you talk about is the importance of environment when it comes to mastery. And you kind of talk about it in a couple of different ways, but one quote, I think towards the beginning of the book, is access to environments where knowledge resides is often a bigger hurdle to mastery than learning itself. So like essentially needing to be in certain environments where you actually have access to the knowledge itself. So with that being said, what have like you done in your life to like strategically place yourself in environments so that where the knowledge resides that you want to actually attain?
I mean, I think I'm in a very interesting space because most of my career has been doing stuff online, so it's not a physical environment the way that, you know, if you were an elite scientist, going to work for an elite research lab might be the way to get that knowledge. Or, you know, if you're going to be a doctor and you study at Johns Hopkins, you're going to be seeing things differently than if you're in, you know, some sort of small town family medicine clinic. But for me, because I've done so much stuff online, I feel like it's been the social network. It's been the like having friends who are also doing similar things, also doing businesses, getting that flow of information. Like just as a like offhand example, like right now I'm in a WhatsApp group with a bunch of other authors, and people are sharing things like, you know, how they're, you know, testing book titles, and, you know, like lots of detailed data on like, you know, what matters for selling books and for getting publishing deals and this kind of stuff. And I mean, I've done this for a while, so I know some of this already, but I mean, it's just an example of like, if you were outside of that group, if you were outside of those social networks, this stuff is not obvious. It's not like you would just know, you know, in your heart, this is the right answer. You have to actually know in detail how it works. So I think the social network is very important for learning.
Yeah. To kind of go back to the self-efficacy idea, do you, when I was reading about self-efficacy, I would, especially within this context, kind of define that as like your belief in your ability to learn a particular topic. Is that similar to like a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset?
Yeah, I mean, the research is definitely related. I think growth mindset, so just if we're going to be like technical, the idea of self-efficacy is that it's quite specific. So like I could have self-efficacy that I'm going to succeed on this math test, but I might not have self-efficacy that I'm going to be able to like slam dunk a basketball, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not it's different from just self-image, which is like how you see yourself, or your overall self-confidence of just like this is how, you know, I feel good about myself. Self-esteem is another example that is different from self-efficacy. Growth mindset's obviously related. If you believe that, you know, in general, I have the ability to grow and improve and this kind of thing, and this is a belief you hold about yourself, then you're more likely to have self-efficacy in a lot of learning pursuits. But I think one of the things that I really like about Bandura's concept of self-efficacy is that it can be quite specific. So you have people who have lots of self-efficacy in athletic domains and really low self-efficacy in academic domains. Or you have people that are the opposite. You know, they're very bookish and they're very good at like, oh, I have no problem completing a PhD, but get me out for a jog for 20 minutes. And I'm like, oh, I can't do this. And so I think while it's very important to cultivate a growth mindset in general and a belief in general that you can improve and do these things, I think it's also important to clue in that like a lot of our self-efficacy is just, you know, do I have mastery experiences in domain? Do I have the ability to see other people have mastery experiences in a domain and be able to think like, oh, I can do that? You know, those are really important factors for building that self-efficacy in a new pursuit.
Yeah. And this question, I'm going to try to formulate it as I speak. There's kind of like, you know, in your book, you talk about a lot of different methodologies of learning and optimal methodologies for learning. But then we're also kind of talking right now almost like a mindset for learning. And so I'm kind of thinking like, okay, there's an importance of mindset. There's an importance of methodology. Which one is most important? So I'm thinking kind of like, you know, if I have the mindset and I really believe I can do it, and I'm trying a particular methodology. So like maybe I'm looking to get in better shape and I'm trying a particular methodology and it's not working, but I have a strong mindset then. And so I pivot methodologies and maybe that works okay, but then I pivot methodologies again. And like the mindset allows me to continue to be curious so that I ultimately will get the result that I want, versus somebody who maybe like doesn't have that strong of a mindset. And if they don't hit that right methodology first, then they give up. I guess talk to me about how important is like building the right mindset versus finding the right methodology?
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's kind of like a stage problem, right? Like you need to have the motivation, you need to have the right attitude about learning to even get yourself going, right? Because as you said, like if you just sort of start off and you're using kind of not a very effective approach to learning something, if you have the right mindset, you're going to pivot, or you're going to do a little bit more research, or you're going to talk to people. Like, I think the chances that if you have a really, really good mindset, that you're not eventually going to find a good methodology, or like the best methodology you can get, are pretty low. So to me, I focus a lot on the methodology in the book, because to me, I think that's the thing that someone who has a good mindset is going to want to know. Like, what do we know about how learning works? Like, I kind of wrote the book for people like you or myself who are interested in learning, interested in getting better. And they just, like, it's not obvious which way of practicing is better, or which way of studying is better. And so that's sort of my job, is to try to reveal that to people. But you're obviously right. I do this when I'm like interacting with students a lot, that you can see the students who have enthusiasm for learning, they have a confidence for learning, they have a desire to learn. They can even have like totally wrong theories about what the best way to learn is, and I'm sure it's like impacting the results somewhat, but they end up getting better results in the long run than someone who is like, has a bad attitude, but is very, like, they just happen to be in the best program, or they happen, because at the end of the day, that person is not going to really like have that drive to intake knowledge, to intake new skills, to work on it. And so, it's true across life. Mindset comes first.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, definitely. Mindset comes first, but then when you find the right methodology, it just expedites and accelerates the process. Given your knowledge on how to learn things and get better at things, is there like a particular skill or talent or like piece of knowledge that you have kind of like applied some of your methodologies for yourself to like more rapidly learn something?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of how I got started in this sort of line of work, is that, my origin story, as it were, for this writing about learning, was doing some of these intensive projects. So shortly after university, I did a project I called the MIT Challenge, where I was trying to learn MIT's four-year computer science curriculum. Now, they happen to post final exams and solutions and like a lot of the programming project material online for free. So I did a project, this was over 10 years ago now, but where I worked on it over a year to try to learn and pass those exams. So I did that one. I did another project with a friend. We called it the Year Without English. We went to 4 different countries to learn Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin, Chinese, and Korean. And like the idea was that when we land in each country, we'd only speak in that language. So we got to an okay level in those different languages, that we have some videos. So if anyone's interested, they can check that out. And I've also applied it to like portrait drawing and painting and quantum mechanics and all sorts of other things. So, I mean, definitely this advice, this book, all of these things come from my own deep passion in learning actual things, as opposed to just merely, a research interest.
Yeah. So a lot of people, as we've discussed, health and fitness focused. Let's try to apply this a little bit to somebody who's like, I want to learn how to eat healthier. And like right now, they know basically nothing. Like, they don't really know what calories are. They don't really know carbs, protein, fats, or anything like that. Like, if somebody is on here and be like, man, there's just a lot of information about how to eat, and I really don't know how to eat. But if I want to like strategically teach myself kind of how to eat healthier and how to cook, what are some, like, obviously I know that's not your expertise, but how would like you help somebody navigate that like self-teaching process, if you will?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you can totally apply the framework that we just talked about. So C, in this case, I think because nutrition is a relatively well-studied field. So we're not talking about, like handcrafting a canoe or something like that. We're talking about a field where people have written lots of books. People have lots of opinions about nutrition, if you haven't noticed. And there's lots of ideas out there. So usually when you have a domain like this, nutrition in particular is one where there's a lot of like, there's just a lot of stuff. It's like part of the problem is that there's too much stuff. There's too many books, too many people saying one thing and then other people saying another thing. So my advice for people is go for the boring textbook rather than the flashy bestseller. If you just want something to read just to like get you motivated, then yeah, get the easy read from the, top of the shelf. But if you're looking for like, I want to get serious about this goal, pick up a book on nutrition, because then it will get rid of the hype. You'll be like, okay, this is what people actually know. This is what people don't know, this kind of thing. For nutrition in particular, I highly recommend Stephen Guyenet has a website called Red Pen Reviews, where he reviews nutrition books. He's a he's a neuroscientist and a nutrition researcher, and he reviews books on like their scientific accuracy and like how they comport with like best standards. So if you're like dealing with that's probably a good place to start. But so that would be the C part, getting the knowledge. Now, at the same time, and I say the same time, not like you want to read 50 books and then get started, but at the same time, you want to start doing, which would be making changes to your diet. And now, obviously, there's lots of different strategies here. Like if you're trying to lose weight, you've got calorie restriction, intermittent fasting, you've got, restrictive diets, these kind of things. But do something, right? Like I don't know what the right answer for you is. I don't know whether anyone knows the right answer for everyone, but do something. That's going to be giving you some experience. And I think reading while you're doing is a very good pairing activity, because the books and the ideas are going to get you motivated. They're going to remind you of the benefits of nutrition. So there's an inspirational quality to that, as well as giving you information about like things that you maybe didn't know about. Like maybe you didn't know what triglycerides are, or this kind of thing, right? And then finally, feedback, which is, you're going to be measuring yourself on the scale. You're going to be measuring your waist. You're going to be checking maybe other things for your fitness, and you're going to be able to see what's working and what's not working over a longer period of time. Now, I think with the nutrition cases, definitely you have some delays with the feedback. You're probably not going to be able to like do things instantly. I mean, although people are now doing that like continuous glucose monitoring thing. So there's some real like kind of, if you're geeking out, there's some like more intense things you can do. But even just the basic stuff of measuring, how far can you run, how much do you weigh, these kinds of things. That's a source of feedback that can help you figure out not only just applying the general advice, but what works for you in your particular situation. And so that would be how I would apply that framework to this problem.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I mean, super simple and applicable. It's like find somewhere to learn, whether that's reading or a podcast or whatever. Start implementing some of the stuff and with some sort of aim in mind, with some sort of like, I'm doing this so that I can get this results, so that you actually have some sort of feedback as to telling you whether or not the thing is working or not working. I love it. I feel like schooling nowadays, there's probably a lot of just approaches that are just old school approaches that are not really optimal anymore for a lot of schooling. And let's say like a teacher who is like a high school teacher who's been doing it for a number of years, comes to you and is like, Scott, I know I've been teaching the same way for a lot of years, and I feel like I'm not getting to my students as good as I could be. What are a couple of different methodologies that I could experiment with and try on that I'm not doing right now in order to really have this stuff hit home with my students a little bit more than it currently is? And this can be like, maybe like if like I have an entire semester to try this new approach or this new methodology, what would you say like as a couple of different things that somebody might try to implement?
So are you asking about how, like, what are some good teaching methodology, or are you asking about like what is the process that someone could approach in general, kind of like improving it, their craft kind of idea?
No, I would say if I was like a teacher and what like specific methodologies that I would use to teach. Yeah.
So I'm a big believer in the work of Siegfried Engelmann and direct instruction. So this is this idea that the problem that we have with most classes is that for the students who are bright, the students who can quickly grasp the subject, they already have either background knowledge or they're just smarter and they can just pick it up. You can kind of do whatever and they're going to learn well, right? Like you can have a sort of a bad teaching environment and they'll still perform well on the final exam. But it's for the students who are below sort of the standard, the students who are struggling, they need more help. And one of the things I talk about in the book is this idea of cognitive load theory, which is that one of the major bottlenecks of learning is that when we're encountering new information, we have a very limited mental bandwidth. So as soon as ideas get even a little bit too complicated, you're presenting a little bit too much stuff right at the same time, it's hard for people to follow along and process it. This is related to the idea we talked before about like the physicist skipping steps in the derivation, right? The physicist can jump from step 1 to step 5 because steps 2, 3, and 4 are obvious to him, but to the new person, they're not. And so the key ideas of direct instruction is, how do you figure out what the skill is? How do you break it down into simple components? and then build it up through small pieces of practice. So if you're teaching something that's complicated, you know, like we were using the nutrition example, like if you're teaching a class of nutrition, it's not enough for you to just like read out the definition of a calorie and then just be like done with it. You've got to talk about this concept in a few different ways, get the person to like, okay, so, you know, this is a calorie. What does it mean? Like how much is, you know, what is the relationship in carbs and proteins or whatever for calorie? You introduce it in a few different ways. You talk about it in a few different ideas, and you get these quick cycles of like, you explain an idea, you ask a question, you get feedback, and that allows you to steer the class. I think problems with learning are often, again, skipping over steps, but also you have situations where, you know, you just talk for like half an hour and there's no point where you're engaging with the students, getting these little like breaks to see what they understand, what they don't understand. Do they actually understand what you're talking about? And so that's harmful for you as a teacher to like, you're not getting that feedback from, oh, actually, they needed steps 2, 3, and 4, and I skipped over it. But also, you know, the students are not getting actively engaged too. So, you know, the students who stop following you at step 1, they're just asleep now and they're not even paying attention. And so if you can engage them and you get that feedback, I think that's very important.
I love it. I love it. Well, last question, just to apply this again to kind of like the health and fitness side of things. We were talking about this a little bit before we were recording, of how there are more and more studies or science around the importance of fitness and training to obviously your health, but like your cognitive ability, your ability to retain information, your ability to perform well on certain cognitive tasks. Talk to us about a little bit of your understanding about the link between physical fitness and cognitive ability.
Yeah. I mean, I have a whole chapter in my book where I say the mind is not a muscle, because this idea of brain training, that like you're going to do these little like crossword puzzles or Sudoku games, is going to make you smarter. Turns out there's not much research behind that. And that has a lot of implications for how we practice and learn skills. But the reverse of it is that even though the mind's not a muscle, training your muscles improves your mind. So if you can do physical activity, I mean, most of the research has been done on cardiovascular exercise. So, you know, running, jogging, aerobic workouts. I don't know that much on like resistance training, but the idea here, and I think the sort of core idea that's useful to keep in mind, is that the brain is a part of the body. So just as physical activity and fitness and diet and these kind of things are useful for keeping all the other organs in your body healthy, turns out they're also important for keeping your brain healthy. But there's even some specific brain related things, like for instance, scientists have found that if you do physical activity, it increases the amount of this brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a thing that causes the neurons in your cells to, you know, branch out more and connect better together. And so they've done studies in like rodents, for instance, where like the hippocampus, which is a crucial part of our memory system, that this shows increased growth, increased brain-derived neurotrophic factor after you have some exercise compared to if you're sedentary. So if you are trying to like, I just want to think better, think more clearly, think smarter, then definitely the daily workout rather than the brain training games is the way to go.
That's awesome. That's awesome. If you were setting a new goal for yourself to get better at something, what is one methodology that you're like, I'm definitely going to be applying this to whatever it is I'm going to try to get better at?
Yeah. I mean, I try to cover a lot of different sort of ways you can apply. Like we've talked about this see-do feedback, and it's a little bit too general to say it's a methodology, but I talk about a lot of specific instances because in different skills, you're going to apply it in slightly different ways. So we talked about nutrition, about how the C is going to be mostly reading books. But obviously, if we're talking about learning a sport, like you're throwing a javelin, I'm going to actually be literally seeing someone do that. So I think the idea that I like to start off with is to just frame these components into questions. So the first one is, how can I improve how I learn from other people? So that means, how do I get better examples, better books to read? How do I get access to networks where people are like the WhatsApp group talking about the information that's not so widely known, but it's really important to succeeding at the skill that I want to master? Second, how do I improve my practice? So this is not just, you know, am I getting enough repetition so that I can become, you know, fluent and automatic at it, but do I need to make tweaks to my performance? Do I need to be making drills? There's lots of research on how we practice there's more efficient ways to practice. And I cover a lot of those ideas in the book, which probably we don't have time to go into right now. And then the final idea is, how can I improve the quality of my feedback? So quality of feedback is not just like, the teacher's red pen on your report card. It's also feedback from the environment. Like we were using this example with nutrition, like the scale that you're weighing on is a kind of feedback. But is it the best kind of feedback? Because if you're doing a lot of resistance training and maybe you're gaining muscle, maybe the scale's not changing so much, but your body composition is changing. So maybe you need to find another source of feedback. And so that's an example of, if you can improve these 3 dials, how you learn from others, how you do your practice, and how you get your feedback. If you can improve those dials, you will improve the efficiency of the overall learning engine, and you'll be able to go a lot further.
Yeah, man, those are 3 great questions. I hope everybody writes those down, because there's no doubt that you can apply that to anything. And it's like, before you go aggressively into a pursuit and before you define what your processes are that you're going to undertake on a regular basis, ask yourself those questions. 1, how can I improve how I learn from other people? 2, how do I improve my practice? 3, how can I improve the quality of my feedback? That's so good. And I really just am such a believer in, like, the quality of your life is often dictated by the quality of the questions that you ask for yourself. And those are amazing questions right there. Well, I know everybody's been super fascinated, and you guys need to go get this book, Get Better at Anything, 12 Maxims for Mastery. There are so many just insightful things, being like, well, I did that wrong my entire life with how I've been learning, and I can make this quick change to get better at this, and just such insightful things that are revealing. So you guys need to make sure you go Get Better at Anything, and you can get that anywhere books are sold. We'll have links set up in the show notes. You can also go learn more about Scott at his website, scotthyoung.com. He's also on Instagram at scotthyoung, and he's blogging all the time, writing all the time about how to learn, how to get better, and everything like that. But is there any other good place that people should go learn more about you, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, scotthyoung.com. That's sort of my main website. I've got thousands of articles on learning, productivity, habits, everything. And check out the book. And people can also check out my previous book, Ultralearning, as well. So we hinted at some of these sort of projects I did. That one was focused a little bit on the intensive self-directed learning. So that one's also a good one to check out as well.
Yeah, awesome. Well, so much great stuff here today on how we can learn to get better at anything, from seeing, from doing, from getting the right feedback and everything like that. So I know everybody enjoyed it. You guys make sure you share this episode with a friend or family member who is looking to get better at something, whether that's fitness, nutrition, or elsewhere. So make sure you share it. Make sure you go follow Scott and get the book. But other than that, Scott, that's all we got. I appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That interview with Scott was awesome. I hope you guys took some good notes, and I especially hope that you wrote down those last 3 questions that he shared with us. If you're listening on the Spotify or Apple Podcast app, make sure you hit follow. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit subscribe, because we're continuing to put out some of the most life-changing content out there to help you achieve your health and fitness goals. My personal 3 biggest takeaways from Scott are the following. Number 1, ask experts for stories, not advice. Because sometimes experts aren't the best at giving advice, but when they tell you their story, then you'll be able to extract great advice from it. Number 2, learning from failure is not optimal, at least in the beginning. If you fail over and over and over again right away, your self-efficacy or your belief in yourself to succeed in that arena goes way down. So stack small wins early on, and that's key. And third and finally is ask yourself better questions, like, how can I improve the way that I learn from other people? Be curious about your learning style in order to improve it. If you can do these things, it's going to help you get better at anything, therefore getting you closer to the healthiest version of yourself, and ultimately closer and closer to your best you.